I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck.
Right. Hey guys, welcome to episode 59. I'm Jenna.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are picking up with our mini series on intuitive eating. We are on principle 3. So if you haven't listened to the first two, we would highly recommend going back and listening to those first, just because these 10 episodes kind of detail the 10 steps and principles of intuitive eating. So it's beneficial to listen to it in order. So we're going to get going today with making peace with food.
Yeah, so I will read the little blurb like we've been doing on making peace with food, straight from the book and website. Call a truce, stop the food fight. Give yourself unconditional permission to eat. If you tell yourself that you can't or shouldn't have a particular food, it can lead to intense feelings of deprivation that build into uncontrollable cravings and often binging. When you finally give in to your forbidden foods, eating will be experienced with such intensity, it will usually result in Last Supper overeating and overwhelming guilt. Every time I think about this now, I go back to that Jillian Michaels rant video because she bashes the Last Supper eating thing.
I know, I was literally thinking that as I was reading this and writing my notes down. I was like, ugh, that's just so cringeworthy, her analysis of it.
Yeah, so just in case anyone feels a little bit confused around what Last Supper eating means, is this idea of it being your last time that you're allowed to have something. So we're not talking about in the biblical sense that you're going to die tomorrow, but in the sense of you are making a set plan to not have this thing anymore, or to go on the next diet, or anything like that. I just paused for a second because I was like, what did he die on the cross the next day of the Last Supper? I feel like did I say that wrong?
Yeah, you were correct with the biblical reference.
Okay, thank you. Just had to clarify. Anyway, this truly has nothing to do with Jesus.
Correct.
But that's where the reference comes from. But really, that is not the point. So just to clarify, that is just a saying,
Yeah,
and not taken literally. But it is a good thing to use because of that, metaphor that that's the last time you're going to be able to do something, and what that can cause your brain and body to do. So we talked a little bit in the last episode about the biology of restriction causing overeating. And this whole principle is more about the psychological part of restriction, which is fun because I think that's a little bit more of the fun part to talk about and what we tend to think more of. It's super important what your body's doing, of course, but I think it is super interesting just what we tell our minds and what that causes.
Yeah, and just the fact that the effects of biological deprivation are the exact same as the psychological deprivation, which is crazy. So it just goes to show how powerful the mind is and how important it is to work on the mental side of things when you are going through your intuitive eating journey and trying to target all of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this chapter, they broke down kind of some different ways that we can end up experiencing rebound eating. So what I mean by that is you have restricted for long enough that you kind of hit that breaking point for whatever reason. And this kind of talks about the reasons and the ways that this could happen, but eventually you are going to have that period of overeating if you've gone X amount of time with restricting, and it's not like a personal feat. Like if you can go longer, it's just only going to be a matter of time. It's not really about how long you can discipline yourself to do it. I would say one caveat of that is if you do truly have anorexia, like you will literally ignore until your body is going to ultimately shut down. And that's how that disease works. But otherwise, if we're not into that, you will hit a point of the rebound eating.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to go over the types?
Yeah, you want to like bounce
Yeah,
back?
really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first type is called food competition, and basically what this is like eating in a large group of people can instill like a sense of future food deprivation quickly. So it kind of places the mentality in your head of like you have to eat quickly, get it while you can, and get as much as you can, because for whatever reason there's like a mental block making you think that it's not going to be available in the near future. So because of this competition and being around people, it's like you have to take in as much as you can to essentially compete with the other people around you who are eating. And so it causes you to ignore all of the hunger cues because your mind is like, you have to get as much for you as you can in this very moment.
Yeah. And I think anybody that's experienced like growing up in a bigger family and maybe didn't have as much access to endless amounts of food, that would probably be where that was really connected. And those things that happen at a younger age definitely influence our relationship with food forever. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we continue on this episode. But another form of rebound eating is returning home syndrome. So gorging on foods that you've been deprived of for whatever reason. So this could happen like, wait, are these all under returning home?
No, I messed up.
Okay, that's okay.
Note taking. Yeah.
Make sure. I guess, do you want to share your example?
Yeah, with this one. Okay, so it's basically gorging on foods that you've been deprived of. So any food is going to like have a heightened allure when you're like returning from a journey, if there's been like a specific food or food group that you haven't been able to have. So I had an example of this, and I actually like kind of didn't connect the dots on it until last night when I was kind of like skimming over this chapter again in preparation. When I was in Spain, we didn't have peanut butter. And so I remember like that was the thing, like the group of us who were studying abroad were like freaking out about. We were like, oh my gosh, like we don't have peanut butter. Like I remember me and one of my roommates or one of my close friends like tweeted GIF on Twitter. And we were like, we're a group of like abroad students in Spain. Like we don't have peanut butter. Like please send us a care package, like kind of joking. But it was like the running joke the whole time. Like we had no peanut butter. And so when I got home from the trip, like my mom met me. I have a picture of it with a huge jar of peanut butter and a spoon. And that was like the first thing I like remember like taking spoonfuls of it, like in the car, in the back seat on the way home from the airport, because I was like, I haven't had this in ever. And if you like our previous episode, shared part of my story, me studying abroad was kind of the catalyst that like pushed me into a lot of like behaviors just because of everything that was going in Spain and me preparing for like my senior year of college and like athletics and whatnot. But ever since that trip and coming home and like feeling like I didn't have access to peanut butter and like this whole mental aspect of the returning home syndrome, like peanut butter became a food for me for years ever since that trip that I like couldn't really have around me because I like didn't think I would have control around it. And then if I did have it, I would talk myself into I don't have control, and I wouldn't. And I didn't connect those dots with this until last night. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this happens.
Yeah, it's so wild, like how many epiphanies that you and I have had over the journey of recording this podcast. It's crazy.
And now that I eat intuitively, I can have peanut butter whenever I want and I'm fine. But like for years, it was like, couldn't have it or couldn't trust myself around it. So it's just.
Yeah. The next one is empty cupboard. So like the feast and famine thing where you genuinely don't have guaranteed future access to it. You're going to eat as much as you can in one sitting because you don't know when your body's going to need or be able to get what it needs in the future. And I think that that is a really good parallel to what we're talking about here with mental restriction. Your body holds on to that stuff because it doesn't know when you're going to eat again. So that's where, and again, like we're not promoting weight loss or giving tips to, but we've talked about how people can be eating close to nothing and be experiencing weight gain. And that is part of that as well. Like it's, your body will do that. It will hold on to things because of that. Just like mentally, we're going to do that because we don't know when the next meal is going to come in that situation. Like our bodies are wired for feast or famine because that's just how like things were a very long time ago. And still today, some people do experience that as well. So it's actually our body trying to take care of ourselves. But if we take that outside of actual like poverty, it's still going to have a similar effect.
Yeah. The next example of rebound eating is called captivity behavior. And so it doesn't always necessarily refer to like someone who's been like taken hostage, but there have been accounts of released hostages who have reported like obsessive thinking about food and cravings while being in captivity. But it can also relate to, I think the book gave an example of like someone who was on like at a training camp, like in the wilderness in like a country or a state like Midwest. And he would spend like hours by himself, like writing all the foods he was missing, where normally he would never be consumed or obsessed about food. But it's like when you're in like a, captive or like stuck in a certain place and you don't have access to your normal foods, when you come back, again, it kind of relates to the returning home syndrome. It just like is heightened and increased obsession and thinking about food because you don't have access to it.
Yeah. It really makes me sad, like thinking about this, because I'm not saying that we should always feel comfortable and that it's not beneficial to go through challenges in life, but like things like, captivity, if it's true, or like having food insecurity, that's not something that we should be experiencing, especially with the resources that a good majority of our world has access to. And to think that like the mental part of restriction because of diet culture paralleling these like horrible traumatic things that are not a person's choice, but yet in a sense we do make that choice and sometimes it's just inherent because it's been part of your life ever since you were like as young as 3 years old. It's just so sad because we don't have to put ourselves through that trauma and we don't have to. So that's something that I love so much about like pursuing food freedom and trying to help others with that and just continually working on my own journey, is that that is a choice, not to like make yourself suffer, even though it has this like pretend silver lining of having a better life. It actually doesn't like get you there.
Right.
Anyway, just a random thought that I had. So depression era eating. So again, a lot of this comes back to food insecurity. So this sense that there won't be enough food or certain foods may become unavailable. And the Clean Your Plate Club kind of comes from this era. And then...
Was that all you're going to say?
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't want to cut you off.
Thanks.
The next one is once in a lifetime mentality. So basically, for example, it's like whether you're at a special restaurant that you only get the chance to go to like once a year, or say like you're on, I don't know, like an exotic vacation, like in Spain or France, I don't know, wherever, and you're at a restaurant and like your mindset is like you like leaving only like just a bite of food left seems almost impossible, because in your mind you're like, this is going to be the only time I'm ever going to have this experience. So I need to eat again all of this as much as I can in this very moment, regardless of how my body is feeling, regardless of whether I'm full or not, because this is the only time that I'm going to have it. So it's another kind of like fear of the deprivation of food in the future again.
Yeah. And then there's the one last shot. So like the idea or notion that it's your only time to have these foods. Like if you were at a friend's house having something you don't normally have at your home. And this happens all the time, like with parents not wanting their kids to have sweets, they're going to seek it elsewhere. And it drives you to consume all of it because you won't have it in the future. So I don't know if you guys are catching up. There's a pretty strong theme here.
Yep. And then the last one is just anticipation of food restrictions. So it's like, again, the mere anticipation of starting yet another food plan with forbidden foods is enough to like trigger you to eat that forbidden food. And the book talked about a study with people who were obsessed and who loved chocolate. And so when they were told that they would be restricted from eating their chocolate for a period of 3 weeks, it triggered an increase in their chocolate consumption before and also after the restriction. Whereas before this, they probably, yes, they loved it, but they were able to enjoy it and have it in moderation until you put that like mental and physical restriction. Then it causes this obsession and like hyper awareness of it.
Yeah. So basically we're biting ourselves in the butt by trying to create any kind of restriction. And I think that's always the biggest fear of intuitive eating. It's like, oh, well, if I give myself that permission, I'm just going to eat until I can't eat anymore. And I'm never going to stop. And that is where kind of this pseudo permission comes in. So basically, you're giving yourself permission to eat something. And so I would say like an example of this would be you intentionally like premeditate going to procure something that you think should generally otherwise be off limit. So let's say like you're at work and you really want to go like get some ice cream from your favorite place on the way home, and you've been thinking about this for hours, whereas like other times you may just be randomly presented with something. Like let's say you're at work and there's donuts in the break room, and you just like see one and immediately grab one because that's like not a completely abnormal thing to do, to take part of that, and that actually also is usually because you feel like you're never going to be able to have it again, which is a big issue in workplaces with certain foods. But anyway, that's kind of more like this happened in the moment and you feel like, I don't know why I just did that. Whereas like if you gave yourself permission, you typically are rationalizing that with, oh, well, I'm not going to do this for a long time. Like you put some kind of constraint on it. So it may feel like permission. And this is a really hard thing to kind of tease out, but it's not actual permission because there is a caveat that you're giving yourself in some capacity. And so oftentimes when I am counseling someone or just encouraging giving permission, they're getting stuck thinking, well, I give myself too much permission because they're seeing that premeditated allowance or of any kind as a weakness. But that thinking right there is still 100% tied into restriction. Even though it feels like you're kind of taking a step, it's not it's like with malaligned intentions. And not that eating that thing was bad for you, it's the way you're talking to yourself around it.
Yeah, because you can technically be off a diet, but your mind still be on a diet. So for example, like eating something that is quote unquote, not part of a diet, but simultaneously telling yourself as you're eating this, like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this. Like that is the perfect example of how like, yeah, you may not be on a diet, but like your mindset is still on one.
Or if you like something that used to happen to me all the time was I'd wake up the next morning and feel this like sense of regret for what I had done. So even if I hadn't felt any type of way about it in the moment, the next day I felt guilty, and then that affected my behaviors in some kind of way, whether I tried to eat like quote unquote as clean as possible, or like made a point to exercise if I hadn't planned it, some kind of compensatory thing that wasn't in the moment. So it might not feel 100% associated, but if it's still happening, or there's just this like yucky sense that you feel, even if you can't necessarily put a name to it, that's a good sign that you aren't actually allowing yourself to do it. And when you're practicing this, you probably will feel awful at first, but that over time will fade. So if you kind of check back in with yourself, like your body probably will give you a cue that like wherever you typically feel wrong about things in your body, for me, I like always think about that in my gut. You're going to feel that. And then you know, like, okay, like, yes, this is exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Would you describe that any differently?
Yeah. No, I think you nailed that on the head. Yeah.
And again, that's not something to like judge yourself on, but just kind of a marker of like, what's going on here? Like if you're maybe a bit into your healing journey and you're like, why is this triggering it? I would seriously take a second to think about what else is going on in your world and why you're suddenly wanting to exercise control over something like that if it hadn't been an issue before. So that's kind of like a further along step that you might notice. But when you're first starting out, maybe taking an observation of that, just to kind of know like what's going on, because that's kind of a tangible marker of your progress of the healing process, is realizing like you're becoming more and more okay with repeated exposure to things.
Yeah. No, go for it.
Okay. So they referred in the book to this next explanation as self-fulfilling prophecy. I think of that more as like self-sabotage. I think it's really saying the same thing, but essentially when you put your mind to something, like if you think enough that you're gonna overeat and you like inherently believe this about yourself, you probably are going to. So Jenna, I'm curious what your example is.
My example was, yeah, you can tell me after I explain it if you think this like fully relates with this, but as I was reading this, I was just like thinking of, how truly powerful the mind is. And if you like tell yourself something enough, like that's how your body is going to respond. And so my example is, I guess this started happening 3 years ago when I was on this journey of like, okay, I'm going to stop restricting. I needed to put on weight to like get my period, like to get my cycle back and all of that. So I knew I had to put on a healthy amount of weight in order for my hormones to be working. And for a while when I started this, I was still obsessive over the scale, which is also something I shared that I used as a control mechanism in the past. And so what I should have done at the very beginning of this journey was just like get rid of the scale, because that was going to hinder my mental progress. And so as my body started to make these changes and it started to gain weight and I started to get my cycle back, I was still kind of using the scale as a way to control. And after a period of time, I started noticing this pattern of every time I would weigh myself. So it wasn't like every single time, but I saw a pattern of like every month almost, I was putting on consistently like 2 pounds. And for a while, it was probably beneficial for me and I needed to be doing that. But it got to the point where I was like a year and a half out and it was still happening. And so I literally told my body, I was like, that I was going to expect every time to like step on the scale, it was going to be like a 2 pound increase every month. And for 2.5 years, this pattern, like I told myself, like, that's just what it is. I'm going to indefinitely put on like 2 pounds every single time I weighed myself, which was, again, I like spaced out the time of weighing myself to like every month and a half, 2 months. But I saw this pattern of literally like it happened up until probably a year ago when I finally was like, okay, like cut this out. Like, cause I even remember like going to the doctor and I was like, I'm freaking out because I was like, I'm putting on 2 pounds like consistently every single increment of time. And the doctor was the one who was like, I mean, I don't know. She's like, your body like seems like it's healthy. Like maybe you should stop telling yourself that. And I was like, okay. And I finally got to a point where I was like, okay, Jenna, stop like telling your body this one thing. And finally, like it was after like a month or two of me being like, all right, I'm going to stop expecting this of my body, that it seemed like it was just like, okay, like you're talking more positive things over me. Like we're just going to hang out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it probably has more like that mentality was affecting the things that you were doing. I'm not saying you were like eating too much or whatever,
right?
But I do think that it's our mentality, because when I was still unfortunately helping people with their weight loss journeys, that was actually something that like very quickly I realized when people were like being negative to themselves, they were never making progress. And I think like I can kind of separate that now to exactly that point, and not that it was good or bad like with body sizes, but when you know that you're like having something go on with your body that's not normal for you for whatever reason, and you have that negative self-talk, I definitely think that does impact it. And I don't know if we know like scientifically exactly what that is, but like I've witnessed that over and over and over. It definitely affects it. And I think that that is a good example.
And I think for a while too, I was like, screw it. Like my body's never going to hit this place of homeostasis. So I'm going to, and it essentially, I guess, was a form of self-sabotage too. I was like, screw it. I'm just going to not care at all and like throw health out the window. And like, it was almost this mentality of like, I think we're going to touch on it later, but like the diet rebel in a sense, where my mind was like, well, like, screw it. Like my body's never going to work for me. It's not going to reach this place of balance. So might as well like self-sabotage.
Yeah.
And I think it was once I finally broke that type of thinking that my body and me kind of got on the same team.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
The way that I kind of experienced this, I think, was during my time where I was binging and purging, like knowing that I would overeat and just kind of believing that was going to always happen. And connecting that to being inherently less worthy, which is how I felt. Like it's easier to just keep doing that thing than it and to prove yourself right when you already think you're less worthy. Like that's way, even though it further hurts you, like it's way easier. And so like when you choose to heal, that is like that growth and like that discomfort, like it's uncomfortable, but like you're moving in a positive direction eventually. So that's like a really important thing, I think, is like you put your mind to whatever you want, but when people say that, they're using it in like a good sense, but we have to remember that we can also use that in a very, very bad self-destructive pattern for various reasons. And oftentimes we're probably taught that, but like your mind, like it does matter. And you're not expected to just like do all that on your own. But like if you do need to make a change with any of these things, like that can happen. And if you can't believe it yet, you need to find someone that can hold that space for hope and belief for you to help you along.
Absolutely.
So our minds.
They're crazy.
So then the other thing they talked about along this is giving yourself permission not to be deprived. You're simultaneously letting go of this guilt. So they talked about it like this seesaw of like the deprivation and then the guilt. When you finally allow yourself to have it, when the deprivation comes down, guilt goes up, and guilt goes down, deprivation comes up. So when you start to allow yourself to eat enough, you are letting go of that guilt. It just takes time.
Some time.
because it's really like deep rooted. I gotta see, where was my thought with this little blurb that I wrote, because I had like a good little epiphany there. I wrote how deep rooted trust in yourself and food can be. Oh, because they were talking about this example of someone having this experience of something that happened to them with food as a child, and just not feeling trustworthy because like you did something and then some person, with your best interest or whatever. I think people really do not try and pass these messages along to their children out of any kind of malintent. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
But it happens. And so when you like are told that you don't know how to eat correctly because someone corrects you, then suddenly a child is going to receive that message as, oh, I can't be trusted. I must use these external food rules. And like, I think that's part of why we as a society end up in such trouble, whether you end up with a full-blown eating disorder or not. The majority of us have disordered behaviors because it's cultural. And I think that like inherent distrust of yourself because of the way that we, these stupid food rules are, we believe they're better than our own judgment. And that a lot of that is for financial gain of others, but I will digress there. But it's a good thing to think about is like it's going to take a long time to move through these processes because of how deep-seated those trust issues with yourself are in regards to eating, which is interesting. And it definitely will vary for everyone.
Want to tackle action steps?
Okay.
So
go.
So we're going to talk about action steps of kind of how you can ultimately make peace with food. And I think the key thing here is to give yourself unconditional permission to eat. And I know that can feel incredibly overwhelming and scary for people who have restricted for so long, who are afraid of certain foods. It can bring about this sense of, again, like not feeling like you're going to have control. But I think ultimately, like when you really get to the root of it and like really start to sift out your feelings and figure this out, you are going to realize that after some time, again, it's going to take practice, it's going to take intentional work. But if you can kind of like adapt the mentality and get rid of this notion that like foods are good and others are bad, and that like food does not have the power to make you air quote healthy or not, that is going to be like, in my mind, at least, I think like the key proponent to kind of help propel you towards finally making peace with food.
Yeah. And when you are talking, this crap comes up all the time about any kind of foods, but this good or bad preconceived notion. If you catch yourself thinking it or saying it out loud, you don't need to like beat yourself up about it or be like, oh, like I just can't. If you can pause and try and reframe it, like flip the script, like, maybe this actually isn't such a bad thing. I'm nourishing my body, I'm giving it XYZ. And that's what my body needs for me to have the energy to function for the rest of the day. Like trying to like kind of throw some positive things on it. Even if you do inherently go to that negative, because that's likely. And like Jenna said, like realizing no one food is going to have this power to make you healthy or not. And when we think about that, I really like to give examples of like something that has certain macronutrients that like completely match up with each other. So like, I'm pretty sure I've given this example before, but it always comes to my head first. So I believe that it is apples and peanut butter and milk. What is it? Oh goodness, Danielle. It's comparing eating apples and eating Oreo cookies. But there's particular, or maybe it was Girl Scout cookies that I did it with, but I did this particular example one time and it ended up being an exact match macro wise. Maybe it was cookies and milk and then apple and peanut butter, which now that I'm saying that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to have to reflect on this a little bit and figure out my example. But anyway, we can take foods that we believe are inherently unhealthy and we can purposely match them up quite easily with something that we would say is quote unquote clean and the healthy food. And if you break it down and get similar macros, yes, technically there may be micronutrient differences. I'm not even going to entertain the ingredient list thing right now, but you are like, if your body needs a balance of nutrients for fuel, that's it. Like that is it, period. End of sentence. And we just need to challenge that because your body needs fuel and it doesn't actually care as much about these things that our society has made up as we think it does, because there is no evidence of that. We say it, but I want to see the studies that are repeated that show it. And yes, food does have power to influence your health 100%, but we can't jump to that because that's where it got us here in the first place. And a brand new eating disorder has developed over the past several decades because of our obsession about perfect eating.
And ingredients.
Orthorexia. So clearly that is not the answer to just inherently obsess about it. And I always like to throw this out, like anyone who has to look at stuff for allergies or has a legitimate intolerance to something, like, yes, technically it's going to be a slightly different experience. You can still practice the same thoughts though in general about food, just knowing that those certain things aren't going to make you feel particularly great or maybe have a reaction, but it doesn't mean that that thing is inherently bad, so you can still flip the script on that one as well.
Another one is allowing yourself to eat without obligatory penance. So what that means is, I think there's, again, like a pseudo permission type thing here where people are like, oh, well, now I'm allowing myself to eat forbidden food A, which could, I don't know, be pizza, for example. But if you're still mentally being like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to eat pizza tonight, but tomorrow I'm going to either skip this meal or I'm going to go run X amount of miles to quote unquote work it off. Like, that is still not making peace with food. Like, eating without that obligatory penance is being like, I'm going to eat the pizza, period. That's it. And not having to have a thought follow that to be like, but I'm going to do fill in the blank to, correct it. And that can be a process as well. That's not going to happen again overnight. But I think one of the next ones, is allowing yourself to eat those fear foods, and just sitting with it. And how do you feel? And not having to make up for it.
And eat what you really want. Not what you're tricking yourself into wanting because you're afraid of what the consequences is if you eat the other thing. And that is separate from our brain knowledge. That's when that is, I think, kind of pseudo permission too. It's well, there is this pizza here, but maybe I really just want the salad because it's less calories, XYZ kind of thing. And no one else can tell you if you're doing that. You're the only one that's going to know. If truly you're making a choice to honor yourself or if you're doing it out of fear. And there's a lot of people who really disagree with that one because of this idea of having to eat this perfect diet. But that's just not going to work in conjunction with healing relationship with food. So allowing all foods, again, as long as there's no allergy or intolerance there, because otherwise there's restriction and that's the thing that we can't have. Another super important thing is trying to remember that your food choices don't reflect your character or morality. And a lot of times I've kind of put this idea on someone, maybe you don't want to do that because you think like you're being bad if you do it. And people are very quick to be like, no, no. I personally don't buy that. If you have an end goal of weight loss, I don't believe that you don't think you're bad if you eat a certain food, because just like my study and understanding and my own journey has shaped that view. I respect you if you don't think that, because that's not ever my goal to like put that on someone, like this is what's happening here, like unless you're really just not thinking rationally in like a one-on-one situation. But like overall, I just want to throw that little nugget of info out there that really doesn't make sense that you feel like it's okay to have that if you are then like in another sentence saying, oh, I shouldn't have this, or I've cut this out or whatever because I'm trying to lose weight. Well, why do you need to lose weight? Like, I think that's all very interconnected, and it's important to try and practice telling yourself that is not a connection, because otherwise, like, that's how we relearn things or unlearn things.
Another one is eating the foods that you forbid, because this may end up making you realize that you may not like that food. You may only forbid this food and think that you like it because you've restricted it for so long. And just like the cravings are coming from the restriction. Or you may find out that you do really enjoy it, but you're not really going to know until you test it out. And so, Danielle, do you want to like kind of touch on your notes that you have about like making notes and stuff?
Absolutely. And I also have another opinion on this particular thing that I want to share. And this has nothing to do like with arguing with you, Jenna, because I know that this is in the book. But if we talk about how you may realize that you don't like love a certain thing that you feel like you always like would binge on or just like can't handle yourself around, and we talk about that, and I think that that is meant to be a helpful piece of information, because it kind of like gives you hope that you will be able to eat all foods. Because if you think you only like things that are labeled in society as bad, then like it really puts you in a sticky situation. And I think that that's where that comes from, is like when you have like, it's that mental power over it. I do take issue with this particular thing, because when that is stated, that actually reinforces to anyone that is healing that it's actually not good for you to like this food, and it reinforces it being a bad food. And so I think we have to be super careful. Like, this is a fact. Like, I've watched this happen to tons of people, and I've even experienced it myself. Like, this does happen, but that's not like the goal of intuitive eating. It's to actually like come back to your body and figure out what the heck you even like. But I think sometimes this gets used as like a sneaky little diet culture-y reinforcer, and we have to be really careful with that, just like in general, because that's where I think intuitive eating can get used in a very like negative, harmful way. And you know, you can make the argument you're never going to make everyone happy no matter how you word things. That's probably true, but I think it's good to call that stuff out. And this one has always just like irked me. And I think that's why there's been like 4 versions of this book, is because there's so much of this stuff to actually fully 100% tease out all of diet culture. There probably needs to be more, you know, more editions of any of our thoughts. So like, just consider that, because if you hear that and you're like, oh good, I won't eat cinnamon buns anymore, that is diet culture talking. That's your eating disorder. That's just bad behavior, not serving you in a recovery focused way and healing way. So anyway, I won't keep going off on that, but that one bugs me a bit. So this activity that can help to kind of put that into action is to make 2 lists. So you're making a list of things that make you feel good and things that make you feel bad. And typically the first thing we think of when I say that is people are going to write salad makes me feel good because it's a healthy food. And ice cream makes me feel bad because I feel guilty. Like, you may not actually have even realized that's why you're thinking that, but that's typically where our brains are going to go with this exercise. So I want you to go there. I want you to talk about the things that make you feel guilty and the things that make you feel like you're a good little diet culture student, girl or boy. But then we need to also take that and do another list of the foods that make you physically feel good. Do you like the taste of it? Does it make like you feel happy? If you are in a place where you can feel that connection with food, which not everyone's going to be, but like, is it a joyful experience to eat that food? We're taking our brain knowledge of any nutrients out of that 100%. Just how does your body physically feel? And then the things that make you feel bad physically, we all have something that we eat and it kind of makes our belly like, ugh, or our taste buds like scream, or even maybe like a little bit of a gag reflex. Like, we all have those dislikes. And so that definitely would be on that list. So then the point of this activity is I want you to reflect on what things matched up and what things didn't match up, because then you can start to tease out a little bit more. Okay, maybe I'm making these choices out of this information that isn't necessarily like productive, and I'm not actually honoring my body. And that's really what we're trying to come back to with the whole goal of intuitive eating and making peace with food. And just thinking like, why do we think this? And then you can even take that one step further if you're really feeling up for it. And if there's foods that you feel bad for eating, okay, let's rationalize why you don't need to feel bad about eating X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
So it can really become like multiple activities, but just kind of like we always encourage, like, write it out. But if you have kind of like a specific prompt, it can help make it a productive exercise.
Yeah. I love that. I don't think I've heard it like that in depth, like the comparing the differences. So I think that's really cool. I'm glad you shared that.
Awesome. And then I realized there's actually more to this. For the whole making peace with food thing, you have to practice. And that's probably the most annoying piece of advice that I give all the time as a dietitian, is that you can't think this into existence. Yes, like that part matters. The self-talk, we talk about that all the time, 100%. You have to actually act on it also. And that requires repeated practice. So the way that I like to do it, there's no right or wrong way, but to have repeated exposure of the same thing. So if you're like, we'll go back to that chocolate example. If you're afraid you can't control yourself around chocolate, keep chocolate in your house. Give yourself permission, incorporate it every single day. You will probably get tired of having chocolate every single day if you give yourself permission to eat it. And that, again, might sound like I'm saying, oh, chocolate is bad. Actually, what I'm saying is, that's how you align yourself with what you actually enjoy eating. And it really brings stress levels way down, because then you can eventually get to a point where you can keep chocolate in the house and you don't have to have it every single day, or you do. That's up to you. But it doesn't feel like this scary monster that needs to be locked up or removed or eaten all in one sitting so that you don't have it tomorrow. And that's how we kind of work through that one step at a time. I really encourage you to practice these foods in a safe place and at a good time. Don't do it when you're rushed, because we want mindfulness to be a part of this, even though that is like sometimes not possible. So if that's too scary, watch TV or do something to distract you while you're doing it so that you can get through the actual process, depending on how scary this is. And make a mantra for yourself. Some kind of self-talk that tells you it's okay as you're working up to it, and to kind of fight that anxiety about it, or the thought that this is absolutely psychotic, and then implement some kind of like coping mechanism or skill that you have if you're feeling highly stressed after. You may or may not. It really just depends on the person and where you're at with your relationship with food. But that's kind of been my like activity and the full way to do it. And then you have to keep doing it with the same food over and over until it is legalized. Because otherwise it's just going to be like, oh, like I did this thing one time. You have to have repeated exposure. Just like with a habit you're trying to make, like oh, I flossed my teeth once last month, that literally did nothing for you. Like, you need to floss regularly kind of thing. Like, it has to become incorporated part to actually, like, be affecting. So I don't know that was the best example, but, like, you do have to do it again and again.
Yeah.
So, what else? Oh, my other thing here was just that sometimes I still have to take a quick little time to do a mental check that things are okay, because there's rampant diet culture messaging everywhere, and sometimes things will slip through the cracks to me, even though I would say, like, I have a pretty healthy relationship with food and that I am an intuitive eater. Sometimes that stuff still affects you, or like something triggers an old eating disorder behavior, and then it's like, okay, mind, why are we doing this? And I share that. I think that can be dangerous, but like in the podcast, me and Jenna are super transparent. I would not always share this in a one-on-one situation, but I think it's important to know that, like, not to scare you that, like, oh, these thoughts will never go away, but more to, like, remind you that we're not sitting here like we're perfect intuitive eaters, because that's not like a real thing, and we still are a continual like work in progress of ourselves and finding our own journey. That's really where I'm coming from with sharing that. Because I think it's unrealistic to say that we ever hit this place where nothing ever affects us ever again with something. I don't think that's how we work as humans. So yeah.
I agree.
Oh man, there's more. I have more to say. Making peace with food requires you to challenge your beliefs, and that's part of that activity I was describing. But that gets uncomfortable to think about why something might be different than you've always thought it was. But that is an important, like, tangible process of this. Whether you're having a conversation with someone that is a safe person to talk to, or it's journaling, that's going to have to happen. And I also have something that is relatively unpopular opinion, per usual, that it's okay to break the rules of the Clean Plate Club. Part of me feels icky to say that, because I understand and I hate food waste also, but I just want to know, like, ask yourself this question, or I will ask you this question. What are you gaining from eating everything on your plate when you are at an uncomfortable level of fullness? Because I'm not saying we're more important than the environment or any, like, I'm not saying that, but like, you have to choose, like, is reducing food waste in that way, because there's a lot of other ways we can reduce food waste, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Is that really that more important to you than allowing yourself to eat until you're comfortably full? And there's a lot of other things that go into it, but I'm talking just isolated Clean Plate Club. I think that needs to go away. I know there are still people struggling with food insecurity. And so that is probably not a helpful message in that particular situation where you legitimately may not know. And so that's a completely different conversation. And in that, I would say, okay, like, realistically, what are the resources that we have to help space any nutrition out for you so that you do still have access to working on this healing relationship with food thing and trying to come back to honor your body? Like, what can we do for that? And what resources are available, if any? That's kind of where I would hear that conversation. But aside from that, if it's not a food insecurity thing that's driving that, it's more of like your parents maybe had that and you don't have it anymore, which I hear a lot. You have to stop that. And it's going to take practice and it's going to suck. So a way to help that a little bit, and this actually helps with like binge eating as well, plate your food a little bit smaller, and not because I'm trying to like, this is not a weight loss tip, but allow yourself to have seconds, like legalize seconds, and try and see if like a smaller portion feels more comfortable, and then utilize that for leftovers. So I think part of the problem is that we think seconds are this bad thing. But if we actually allow ourselves to utilize that food later, we can try and see. It's just like, it's trial and error, kind of like, if I ate this same meal and I had this full portion, I was super full, you know, it's going to vary day to day, but you can start to learn a little bit more about what portions of certain things that you need on an average day just by practicing. And so something that I think further helps with this is, what if I make a smaller portion because I'm like cooking for myself and I make too little of food and I'm still hungry? That's not what I want for you. So in that case, I would really recommend keeping foods around that are easy to add as like a dessert or like an after part of the meal, something you like. And I have some examples of things that like we keep in our house for this particular purpose. Yogurt with granola or protein powder or peanut butter, popcorn with butter, microwave nachos. So like tortilla chips with sprinkly cheese, and then you microwave it for 30 seconds with some salsa or avocado or some kind of dessert. And those are things we literally always have, unless we really need to go to the grocery store. So that if we do have a smaller meal, like I was running into that problem in my journey of trying to eat perfectly clean, quote unquote, because there was no food accessible. If I was still hungry, I would have to go through this like giant process of cooking more, and then I would just go to bed hungry because it was too difficult. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to keep easily accessible foods around. We avoid that because we feel like we're gonna overeat. But if you're trying to honor yourself and your fullness levels, that might mean you're eating smaller portions at meal times, meaning you're going to have to eat outside of that as well. Like maybe an hour after dinner, you get hungry if you're changing your portions up to try and practice some of that. So that's kind of a loaded example. But I really think Clean Plate Club needs to go away.
Yeah, I agree.
In order for healing to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is all I have.
Yeah. I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back next week with our part 4 of our intuitive eating series. And as always, we love ratings and reviews. You can find us pretty much any place you can listen to podcasts. You can follow our joint Instagram page if you don't already for additional anti-diet culture tips and messages, and to just keep up with us at Fit Fueled Free. And then our personal pages, Jenna's is Jen Ep Fit, and mine is Dietitian Dani Cast. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.